Welcome to the Black Duck Revival Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Wilkins. I'm excited to have you join me as I speak with a fascinating collection of folks, all of whom have in common that they've made a way for themselves by finding an intersection between thoughtful consideration and the tactile work of getting their hands dirty. This is an examination of intention, capability, and craft. It's where philosophy meets the blue-collar work ethic and where I find real value. Folks, hello, and welcome back to the podcast. This week, I'm joined by Cason Short. Cason is a rice farmer, and he's the third generation to manage a farm and duck hunting club called Bill Byers Hunter Club that's located just north of me in Hunter, Arkansas. That's in the East Arkansas Delta there. Cason's someone that I've paid attention to for several years now. I've listened to quite a few podcasts that he's done with some of the folks from Express Boats, as well as Jim Ronquest of R&T Calls, and some assorted biologists, waterfowl biologists from the Mississippi Flyway. And I've gained a ton of great scientifically based information about ducks and geese in the flyway that I do most of my hunting in, which is the Mississippi Flyway here in Arkansas. He's also someone that I followed on social media, and I so appreciate the amount of thought and intent that he's putting into his waterfowling activities. It's something that's sorely lacking in a lot of social media content surrounding duck hunting and goose hunting. And again, it's something I really appreciate, and it's a great Instagram page to go to just to kind of pay attention to what's happening in this region as far as waterfowling. He's got a tremendous amount of information and experience with speckled-bellied geese, which, as you know, I'm fascinated with. And he's also kind of served for a long time as a hub of scientific access to ducks and geese for biologists that are studying waterfowl. And we're talking about doing stuff like banding, and as of late, these satellite tracking kind of backpacks that birds are wearing, where we are starting to really gather a lot of telemetry data, and we're finding out stuff about the migratory patterns of waterfowl that we didn't know before. As I stated last week, this is going to be the second in a very waterfowl-centric series of podcasts. It's, we're outside of waterfowl season now, and so it's a great time to get access to folks that spend a lot of their time and energy pursuing those critters. And it's also going to be another podcast where we talk about some strongly held opinions in the realm of waterfowling. So, fair warning on that. I don't think we're saying anything out of line here, but again, we're presenting some opinions, and opinions are often like excuses. Everyone has them. They all stink. Yeah, I guess you could compare that to something else that my vice principal in high school used to say that all the kids in my school had as well. Anyway, I digress. Again, this is my conversation with Cason Short of Bill Byers Hunter Club. Hope you enjoy it. All right, folks. Well, welcome back to the podcast. This week, recording long time in the making, I am north of Brinkley, Arkansas, and I am at Bill Byers Hunter Club. It's got a well-known presence in the waterfowling community on Instagram. Lots to do with scientific-based waterfowl research as well. And I am here in the lodge with Cason Short, the third generation, to run this farm and this lodge. And Cason, pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, man. Glad to be here.
Well, so we've been, as always happens on this podcast, because it's kind of hard to just start a recorded conversation. We've been talking for a while. But yeah, if we can, without losing too much momentum, I'd I'd love to kind of hear just about the history of this place. There's tons to talk about. We've got strong opinions on waterfowling. We've been kind of trying to figure out how to present those without sounding like know-it-alls. But yeah, this place is super interesting, and I'd love to hear just kind of about like how your grandfather started it, because it's there's a lot involved in waterfowling in Arkansas. That's a lot of folks that like get into it for a kind of a brief moment in time is like an economic is a way to like feed themselves economically, kind of here for a moment and then gone, like these kind of short-lived outfitters. But I mean, are you guys getting close to 100 years?
We are. We'll approach, I guess next year will be 70 years.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, in this spot. So I don't know any way to kind of keep this brief, but we'll get pretty far into it, I guess, if you want to.
Yeah, there's no need to be brief on this.
Well, I can nerd out and talk about stuff for a long time, too. So my family, the Byers family, settled in Arkansas shortly before the Civil War. So we've been here longer than rice production. Originally settled down at Lodge's Corner.
Yep.
Founded one of the first churches down there. So my grandfather moved up here in the 40s. I want to say maybe late 40s.
Hey, do you know where they came from before Arkansas?
Yeah, Birmingham, Alabama.
Okay.
Yep. And I think at that time, Arkansas, the population was so low and the tax base was so low that they were giving land away to settlers. And I want to say it may have had something to do, the matriarch of the family brought them here. The husband had passed away. And I don't know if maybe there was more incentive because of that, because she was single. But anyway, they gave them, I think, like 40 acres to start a homestead on. And that's what brought them to Arkansas from Alabama.
Okay.
So he, fast forward a number of years, moves up here in the 40s and starts sharecropping, and was always, I think, going the way of farming. Like he wanted a place for his own. But it really started out early on. He started buying ground right here in 1953. He had a partner early on, and it eventually bought him out. But they started with 1,800 acres is what he bought, and it was all green timber. And he had seen what commercial duck hunting was doing around Lodge's Corner where he came from. He knew the economic value of that, and used that to pay his note. That's how he paid for the ground that he bought. And I know at one point he talked to me about a lot of the land he was paying the taxes on. Hunter was originally a timber community. There wasn't a lot of agriculture here at the time. So the timber money had kind of moved on and moved away from the community. And there were people that just owed taxes, delinquent on their taxes. You could go in and pay the taxes on it and take ownership of the land. Mm-hmm. So at one point he had told me he basically felt like he could have bought the entire county if he wanted to. Of course, as a 8-9-year-old boy, I'm like, man, why didn't you do that? And he tried to explain to me. He's like, I didn't think I could pay for what I'd already committed to. And at that point in the 50s, that was a lot different world than what we live in now. So buys the initial land, and the building right here behind us, it's all tied together now, but this one little small room here behind us, he would run 100 people a day through that building, and he charged $10 a head to duck hunt.
100 people a day?
100 people a day.
Wow.
Yep. And you have to think about that when we talk about conservation and when we talk about party hunting and these big groups and stuff. Now that's on 1,800 acres and it's green timber. So the pressure's a little different than trying to stack 100 people on 1,800 acres of farmland. But still, that's a lot of pressure on a resource.
Sure.
And in today's world, there's no way that 1,800 acres would support that kind of pressure. The resource wouldn't tolerate it. So just that's a good example of how different the world was just 70 years ago. So anyway, it continued to do that. And I want to say 62, Arkansas went to a 2-duck limit, 20-day season, which, as we mentioned, mallards in the woods, that was a 1-duck limit for us. We weren't really killing any gray ducks or any other species. So that kind of catapulted him into farming. I think he was probably always going to go that direction, was working towards that anyway, but that really accelerated that process in clearing the land and putting it into production. So fast forward to where we are now, it's we own a little over 3,000 acres here that he was able to buy before he passed away, and we are trying to reforest some of it. It would be nice to just wave a magic wand and put it back like it was, completely natural, untouched as much as you could. But our business has changed. It's agricultural, it's production, and it's just not as easy to walk away from that, from a operating business.
I mean, do you consider yourself a farmer primarily?
No, I don't. And I talk to people. My mother and I have that conversation a lot about her dad. Like, he was a good farmer, and this is really good, really productive rice ground. And we have a tailwater recovery system, which is, you hear and see a lot of those, especially down around Stuttgart, where you have water issues, where water is more expensive because of the depth of the water table. But we catch about 90% of our own runoff. So he would joke, he used to tell me that we could wear the wet out of water. We'll catch water that comes out of a field. It'll go into our tailwater recovery system. We can pick it up and use it somewhere else. In a dry year like this year for ducks, we'll flood water early. When we didn't catch any rain later and they had kind of eaten all the food out of that field, we let that water out, picked it up, put it somewhere else to give them fresh food and fresh water somewhere else. So he was really kind of ahead of his time in that regard, in being able to see how the land laid and have the foresight to know that you could use that water over and over and over again, and to know that, in a year like this where diesel fuel, farm fuel is now $3.60, $3.70 going into the year, water it's a commodity. And in 1950, not many people thought of it that way. So I say all that to say he was a very successful landowner and farmer, but I don't think that's his legacy. I think his legacy is what he did for the resource, for conservation, for ducks in general, particularly in this community. I think a lot of that started. He didn't start it right here. I don't mean to say that, but there's a couple of families in this area that were very, very paramount in kind of establishing the waterfowl community that surrounds us here in the surrounding miles, and he was one of those.
When you're capturing, this is just kind of like a nuts and bolts question, but when you're capturing that water and you're transferring it, so you've got waterfowl using it, you've got it sitting on that field, are you transferring nutrients too, do you think?
Yes, I absolutely. You'll see that. You can see it in rice production. Our rice that is watered with relift water, which is water that we've picked up, will yield better than rice that's watered with well water, which is ground table. You can see it. We get fish kills in the fall when that suspended nutrients enter that. You get a big rain in October, and all that water, all that sediment enters that system, and the dissolved oxygen crashes because it's breaking down all that plant matter. Our crappie will roll over. You'll kill tons of fish. So there's definitely, you can see it in rice production. There is nutrient in that water. Just fertilizer runoff is suspended in it.
Yeah.
And that's got to play a role, especially, this is March 10th right now. That has to play a role in the way that the invertebrate population is established. We'll see it kind of early in the year, but it really, from January on, the ducks start feeding on invertebrates in that water. And I think that timetable is accelerated by using surface water versus if it were all groundwater, if that makes sense.
Sure. That's something actually people don't talk very much about. And I've kind of been saying it to people for probably 4 or 5 years, is that I think ducks, mallards, everyone's focused on mallards here in Arkansas, but ducks are consuming a lot more invertebrate matter than people realize, especially, I think this would probably be worth getting into since we're talking about the farming aspect. And I get, everyone that listens to this podcast is not like a duck aficionado, so it's probably worth mentioning that just real quick. So Arkansas is at the bottom of the Mississippi Flyway for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Ducks have been coming here to winter, largely because of, just naturally, like maybe 75% of Arkansas would get some water on it in the winter, especially over here in East Arkansas where it's so flat, right? That floats up seed matter. Acorns is what a lot of people are thinking about, like red oak specifically, these small acorns. And that's like a nutrient-rich and calorically dense material for waterfowl that have burned off a lot of body fat coming down here. So it's just like a way for them to put weight back on, right? So then that gets changed a little bit because ground starts to get cleared, but then the turn of the last century, when they started really in like commercial rice production. Like, I believe it started right around Carlisle and then kind of expanded throughout the Grand Prairie. But then that became, we kind of like took out some of that natural habitat and then replaced it with this really available agricultural habitat. And so that kind of helped proliferate this idea of Arkansas as this duck capital of the world. So just in case you didn't know that, that is kind of, there's always been ducks here. This has always been a mallard-centric flyway and wintering ground. And then with the agricultural practices, that kind of like helped it grow exponentially. I explain all of that because, and I know that you know a lot about this because I've heard podcasts that you're on where we talk about this, or where you've talked about this. So, 100 years ago, or maybe, say 100 years ago, the way they used to harvest rice was they'd like get it all in these giant piles, right, in fields. Mm-hmm. And then mallards, I hear them talk about like mallards would come in and just, they'd be on these piles at night and like people would be out there just trying to keep them off, right?
Right.
And so then, as I understand it, agriculture, farming of grains, like we're talking about cereal crops, this is a game of getting the best yield as far as like growing it, and then the best yield as far as harvesting it, right? So you're constantly looking at an evolution of practices to get more, recover more of that end product, right? So that means that the harvesting becomes more and more and more efficient. Now, I'm gonna throw some numbers out that I think I've heard you say, and you correct me, but I believe I heard you say on a podcast, the State of the Waterfowl podcast with Express Boats, that they've kind of determined that a duck will eat in a harvested rice field until it's down to about between 50 pounds of rice per square acre, because beyond that it's too much of an expenditure of energy for the return they're getting like calorically. And that, years past, there used to be hundreds of pounds of rice left per square acre. And now we've gotten so efficient with our methods that, they're starting with like 70 pounds.
Right.
So you're talking about, a harvested rice field that might take weeks. It would sustain birds for weeks for them to dabble around in there and eat this remnant rice. Now they can eat it out in a night, right?
That's correct. So we call that the give-up threshold. And
okay.
It's, like you said, it's the point where it is no longer beneficial to forage. They're expending more calories searching for food than they're taking in actually eating it. And in a perfect world, from a producer standpoint, that combine and harvest will exit that field at basically the give-up threshold. We're right there on the cusp of it. And there's a lot of things that come into play there. Modern farming equipment is so much more efficient than it was 20 years ago, let alone 40 years ago. And it's yield based as well. So you take a combine that operates, at 98% efficiency. Well, if you're cutting 240 bushel per acre, bushel of rice is roughly 45 pounds. You're going to leave more grain at 98% obviously than you would if you're only cutting 160 bushel per acre. So there's some leadway there. But rice production is really, the habitat in Arkansas has changed dramatically in the last 30 years, as Louisiana has too. So when we talk about being on this end of the flyway and what's going on, the changes people are seeing, most of it, in my opinion, is habitat based. A lot of people want to blame food plots or hot crops or things that happen north of us in ways that people are, quote unquote, improving habitat for ducks. And that has a lot to do with it, in the sense that you've now got no-till farming in Illinois and other places, which, I'll have to slow down here, I'll forget which one we're talking about. So let's take no-till farming as an example. You've got a machine that exits a field, waste grain is left ground level, and it's not tilled again. They will come in the next spring with a drill that plants on top of the ground, and you never have to disturb it. So waste grain without soil contact or moisture will not germinate. Essentially, it will lay there until something consumes it or it just rots on its own. Now, you come south And due to modern rice production, this kind of gets into what you were saying earlier. The old way of harvesting rice, they would put all these stacks of whole plants together and have to fight the birds off of it. Well, rice at that point was being harvested later in the year. When I was a kid 40 years ago, we were lucky. I always thought I was lucky if we were harvesting rice by my birthday at the end of September. I thought that was a really cool thing. Like, for my birthday, to harvest is one of the just really cool times of the year, especially if you're in the farming community. Now, by the end of September, we're done with rice. We've been done with it. So we're talking 30 to 40 more days of warm weather now that waste grain has an opportunity to germinate. Mm-hmm. And because we're harvesting earlier, we've got a better opportunity to come in and fall till. So we'll come in with a machine and start working down that rice stubble, because that's the biggest hurdle to rice production, is you've got to get rid of that residue, that stubble, before the next year so you can plant your next crop. So you come in and you disc that field, and now you've given that waste grain, you've given it soil contact, you've given it sunlight, you've got 40 more days of warm weather. And if you get any kind of moisture at all via hurricane or whatever else late in the fall, now that waste grain is germinating. So where we were right at the give up threshold when we left that field, now we've turned all that stuff under and it's germinated, and there's very little grain left at all. And that gets to a further point. John Vion, I don't know if you've paid any attention to him or heard him on some podcasts. Just super, super bright guy. I think he's headed out to California now to work on his doctorate. I could be wrong about that, but he's done some really good studies about duck energy days in Arkansas. And Arkansas as a whole right now is at a deficit of duck energy days, meaning that we don't have enough food to feed the birds that come here annually. And when you think about it like that, we are still getting this massive concentration of waterfowl, but we can't feed them. There's not enough days to put back on their body what they've taken in their migration. And to me, like when you hear that and you think about that, it should ring a lot of alarms as a conservationist that we've got problems coming, and you're seeing it now. I'm sure you've heard the last few years, people always asking, where are the ducks? Why are they not coming here? Why are they not migrate like they used to?
I've asked it.
Yeah, we all have. And it's habitat. I mean, plain and simple. We are not producing the food that we used to, and it's starting to show up.
Man, that's kind of a frightening. Like, I felt something emotionally reverberating me when you said that. So that's probably worth talking about, because it's I don't even know if it's not a secret at all. It's just kind of, look, I know about duck hunting in Arkansas better than anywhere else, so I'll just talk about it here. So there is, to some degree, a divide between public land hunters and private land hunters, right?
Right.
And I'll be honest about it. I was kind of anti-private land until I started getting to hunt it. So, but that's not just about access to birds. It's also about as my understanding has grown. So we're talking about habitat, right? And like it or not, agricultural land, right? Ag land, privately held land, people that are farming for ducks, whatever. This is contributing a ton of food and habitat towards these migrating waterfowl, right? So you can't take that out of the equation. Now, really, a lot of these problems come down to, people are mad that someone has access to something that they don't have, and that's just human nature, and like we all understand that,
sure.
Right? But as far as I think anyone who can look beyond themselves just a little bit understands that if you have good privately held habitat, right? Even if that private land is holding more birds than you, that as someone who's not getting to hunt that place would like, that's still contributing to the birds being in the area, and it's a net win for hunters in that space, right? Mm-hmm. Likewise, if you have good, healthy, publicly held habitat, in the form of moist soil units, or these flooded river bottoms, right? That's going to put food and habitat into an available resource for waterfowl, and that's going to contribute to people hunting on stuff with more limited access having more birds, right? So this stuff feeds each other. As far as I understand it, especially with migrating waterfowl, because of the way that the landscape has changed in the last 100 years, like that resource is incredibly reliant on agricultural land, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, it does make me wonder, and this might be like too big of a question, but so you're a rice farmer, right? You got to make money doing that. To make the money that you need to make on that, you want this harvest to be as efficient as possible. So you're talking about all these things that, like, as someone who is not a farmer, who's like, my primary interest is being able to see and to see birds and be able to hunt birds. How do we find that line? Because like you can't tell somebody that. Well, I guess you can, but no one's going to listen to you and tell them, like, you should not make a living,
right?
And so that I can hunt ducks.
Mm-hmm.
But like, if we are so reliant, and if that waterfowl is so reliant on that agricultural resource, as far as, like, replenishing themselves and being able to head into the breeding season in a good, healthy condition, like, do you have any answers? I'm sure you're thinking about this stuff.
So I'm really glad you brought that up. I saw an Instagram post maybe last week, and it was talking about the green tree issue in Arkansas.
Mm-hmm.
And the question was, what's the one single biggest thing that we can do to preserve public duck hunting in Arkansas? And my comment was, fix private habitat. And it's probably not the most popular comment in the comment section that day, but the point was pretty simple. I think I saw it on Delta Waterfowl a few weeks ago. 98% of all birds that are hatched in the prairie pothole region are hatched on private land. Something like 98%. And you think about that. That's a indicator of how valuable private land is to the resource. Now, I can't put a number on it specifically in Arkansas, but I have heard, 90% or upwards of usable waterfowl habitat in the wintering ground down here is private. So when you think about that, we spend a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of our breath talking about GTRs, public habitat, and what we can do to improve that. But the real crux of the situation is we have to fix the private habitat, because that's the vast majority of what fuels and what drives this resource. Now, we can't let the trees die. We can't lose what makes Arkansas truly unique, which is those green tree reservoirs,
mm-hmm.
those bottomland hardwoods that this whole area used to be. But the conversation, and I've talked a little bit with our commissioner about it, the head of the commission, and a bunch of other friends, we've got to incentivize farmers to care about that resource, the waterfowl resource, because it's difficult to serve two masters. We do it, but we're really passionate about both, so we can make it make sense for us. But if you're only looking at your bottom dollar, there's not a lot of reasons to farm for ducks. So I say that to say, you mentioned earlier when we were talking about some of the places now that you can go hunt private, for a few dollars a day. They've got some people that are enrolling that way, but we've got to find a way to monetarily make it make sense for a farmer to not till that field, because that's a good way to keep what waste grain is on the ground, to keep it from germinating. If you wait later to roll your stubble or knock that stubble down, you're not putting sunlight to the ground. Without sunlight, you don't get as much germination. And I think the rumor mill has it, there's some things in the works to try to incentivize farmers to leave some stuff, to hold water. Right here in this community, the people around us, I can count pretty quickly. There's probably 10 to 15,000 acres that's not being flooded now, that in 1988 was being flooded, and it wasn't necessarily being hunted. People just held water because that's what you did. You stopped the pipes up, you caught rainwater, and the mindset at that point was that was a really good way to get rid of that residue. We do it that way. In fact, if you wanted to walk out here in a minute, I could show you a field that was flooded early and rolled. The rice residue is gone. It looks like the surface of the moon. It's level, it's smooth, rice stubble is gone. Now, you take a field over here that's been worked and not had water held on it, and there's still some residue there, still some work required. But it's just kind of a mindset. Farming practices change. People develop different opinions. So that's what we have to do, I think, from a conservation standpoint. We have to maybe enlighten some people that there are incentives to holding water, and if we can incentivize monetarily people to hold that water, now you're going to start seeing more usable habitat, more opportunities for hunters to find places to hunt. Imagine if overnight we could double the amount of flooded acres in the state of Arkansas alone. How much is the average cost of a lease going to go down when there's twice as much of a product dumped into an economy? It's going to have to decrease, which makes it more accessible.
Do you think it would? You really think it would decrease?
Well, competition's going to go down, right? I mean, you're no longer vying for that. I don't know. I mean, I think my economics professor would claim that it would go down. It may not. I don't. Once you, I mean, it's hard to go backwards on anything.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I'd say in Arkansas, I don't know if I don't know that necessarily would. I mean, because everything you're saying, I think they're cogent points and it makes sense to me. I also know that just because of the marketing of Arkansas,
sure,
people think that any field that has water on it is, I mean, I guess it potentially is a place where you could hunt ducks. And I mean, I've heard, I was just talking to a guy the other day, talking about all these farmers that he works for, especially like kind of in the area where we're at, where we're kind of halfway between Memphis and Little Rock, these large population centers. Mm-hmm. And he said that this farmer or this landowner that he works for, he said he charges top dollar to like all these, sports, as they call them, coming from the cities. And he won't give them any water either. Because it costs him money to pump water, right. And if a pump breaks or something, that costs a lot of money to fix. So he's still able to make some money just on their perception of there being ducks on that. Now, I do take your point about that maybe the lease prices would go down some. Even if the lease, honestly, at this point, even if the lease prices didn't go down, if there was just more good ground,
more access,
with more potential for good hunts, I think people would be all right with that trade-off.
Yeah, I mean, so how many guys do you know that struggle to even find a place to lease?
Yeah,
I mean, we've got some guys here that nearby us that this going on their second year now and struggle to even find a place to go. I mean, cost, I don't know, maybe it's an issue for them, maybe it's not, but I don't think they've even found a place. They found one last year, and they're right now working on a place for next year, and they're struggling to find a place to even get their foot in the door. So I don't know. Anytime we can increase access to land, it's a positive because we're opening more habitat. So if it's new habitat and the birds can use it and it's huntable, then it's a win-win all the way around, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you're also talking about having more places for birds to get a break.
Sure, that's right. Because they're not. We take those high traffic areas, these highly sought after fields in different areas. You've got them down around you, and we've got them up here too. Those are the places that are going to get pressured extensively no matter what. Mm-hmm. So now, if we've got some of these lesser known areas or fields that quote unquote aren't that good for ducks, maybe that's one of those places that they're feeding at night. They're nocturnal. No one really knows it. They're using that area. So I don't know, any acre of water that we can provide that maybe doesn't have a gun in it 24 hours a day is a good thing.
Yeah. I mean, you got to think that it's you do have to think that it's hard to be a duck in Arkansas, man.
Sure.
I mean, I've told people, I was like, just imagine every time you try to get something to eat.
Yeah.
Just someone was trying to get you.
And we think about it a lot through that narrow window of just Arkansas. We touched on it briefly a minute ago, the diet of ducks, and we didn't really get very far into explaining kind of how that diet shifts. So I'll put it out here. Think about it like our own diet, like carbohydrates, protein, and fat, right? Mm-hmm. We calories from those three sources. So probably the least desirable for us is carbohydrates. Like fat and protein is the two best ways to either build muscle or put on body fat, which is the two things that birds need, right? So I'll back up just a little bit. We released some GPS transmitters a few years ago on mallards. We've done some on white fronts, and we've helped out with some different biologists and some studies that are going on there. But one of our mallard hens that came back with this transmitter gets to Arkansas just before season. She's living in some woods pretty close to us here, and she's already night feeding before season comes in. So for the listeners that don't understand that, you can think about, any kind of hunting, be it whitetail, elk. Seems like the older a whitetail gets, the more nocturnal they become, especially the bucks. Mm-hmm. They get used to pressure. They learn how to survive, and they figure out that, hey, if I move at night, I don't get shot at. I don't encounter humans. Well, ducks are doing the same thing. So this mallard hen gets here, and she's coming in here and feeding in a field that we released her the year before, and she's feeding in the middle of the night, right? 2 a.m., she's sitting there eating. And this is a bean field that was cut in October and flooded immediately. So soybeans, when they're flooded, when it's fresh, is a really good food source. Just like anything else, soy, it's high in protein. So ducks really like it. Now, the downside to soybeans is they sour really quickly. They just don't last very long in the water. So this field's been flooded for 6-7 weeks at this point. Pretty safe to say that there's no waste grain left. What was there is either eaten or rotted. So she's already eating protein in this form of invertebrates, and she's doing it in the middle of the night, and she's doing it the opening weekend of duck season, and she's already nocturnal. Now, why is that? It's not because she's been shot at in Arkansas for 3 weeks because the season just opened, but we view duck hunting so oftentimes through our little window as hunters. We look at it through either our lease, our farm, in my instance right here, or just statewide like Arkansas. What we don't think about is that duck's been shot at since September. Mm-hmm. So when you start looking at how long the season is for these birds and how many times they see a gun, hear a duck call, or even hear a gun, the pressure on them is immense. Like, it is tough to be a duck in the Mississippi Flyway, period.
Yeah, I mean, they're starting to hunt them up north of up in Saskatchewan, and then all the way down. And that's kind of how the seasons work too. Like, the seasons are earlier the further north you go. Mm-hmm. So they're kind of opening as they come south. And that's what you see a lot too on, opening weekend, is you've got these birds that are kind of chilling a little bit here in Arkansas. And then, that first day you got a bunch of birds, and that second day you start, suddenly you see a few, you see fewer birds, and then go back out on Monday, and it's like, man, what happened to all these birds I just saw?
Right.
Yeah, no, these are all very cogent points. Well, man, you've mentioned them. You just mentioned them there with white fronts. So most of the folks that hear me talk about white fronted geese, that's going to be the proper name for what I call specklebellies, and that's kind of like a colloquialism. But it kind of seems like over here, and like you in particular, like you were kind of on the specklebelly train well before like a lot of other people, right?
Yeah, potentially. So that's really, I guess if I had a favorite bird, that would be it. I can remember, I guess the first time I ever really got involved with research on white fronts would have been in the early 90s. So my grandfather, closer to Brinkley, had a house and like 40 acres there, and it was 6-foot cyclone fence around it, raised whitetail in it, and kind of a little, hobby project there. But he also,
so just so I can explain to people, so that's no longer legal in Arkansas, right? Like, you can't have. Can you raise whitetail like that?
I don't even know. It's been so long since he had any, or even flew it. It may not be anymore.
I don't think you can anymore.
Yeah, probably not with CWD and all the other fun stuff going on. Right.
But so it was like 40. You said it was 40 acres.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. And this was, so to kind of elaborate a little more, this was back before resident Canada geese were a huge issue. He was very instrumental or motivated to try to help or reestablish the Canada goose population in Arkansas. Little did he know that, meanwhile, the entire species was adapting, and we're going to do it on their own anyway. So he had a brood house and raised Canada geese there in that pen. A lot of them were, pinion wing, flightless birds. Some of them would fly. So he would go out and feed them every morning. Well, in the course of that, white front started showing up and would fill that 40-acre fenced-in pen completely full of white fronts. And he loved it. Like, he would feed them every morning. They would come in. And it was really kind of a cool experience. I know you mentioned earlier that you had a mount done of every goose from Arkansas. But until you add a brant to that list, you don't have them all, because I've seen a brant in that pen.
Have
before.
you really?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
wild, man.
Right. How, like when you think about that, but that's just kind of an indication of the draw of that little space and what it had. So fast forward a little bit, we got to where you could pull up there and see net collars, color marked birds as they're referred to. So before radio transmitters, before GPS transmitters, the only way that you could really study a bird in the field while it was alive was via a color marking. And on geese, that was a colored plastic neckband. Some of them early ones, like that one up there, were aluminum, really, before they did the plastic. But anyway, so you could see them in that pen, and you'd see them periodically, and it was really neat. As a hunter, that's a huge trophy. People get really, really fired up about killing one of those, and it's a really cool thing to do. But we bumped into a grad student there one day, and he was sitting there with a spot and scope, and he was recording these numbers. He would read the 3-digit code on those net collars and write it down, write the location, and would turn it in, and it would go up the food chain and become part of this study. Well, as a young person at that time, I'm 10, 11 years old. Man, I want to do that. Like, we're here all the time anyway, seeing my grandfather help him feed the geese. Like, I'm going to start doing that. So we did. We started recording numbers, and we would keep a log all year long, date, time, and I forget how many numbers. But I think in an average year, over 100 net collars, different combinations we would read on different birds. And this was a big study that was going on in white fronts at the time, so they were more abundant than you see today. But we got in touch with the head biologist for the Canadian Wildlife Service that was running that study and exchanged notes with them. They sent us a bunch of stuff, different areas where birds were being seen and spotted and recorded as they were alive. So I don't know. I say all that to say, I got involved with white front research 30 years ago as a young child, and they really captivated my attention. When you look at before I was born, in the 70s, white fronted geese first came to Arkansas. And I remember my grandfather talking, the first time he ever saw one, he had to go get, a bird ID book out to figure out what it was.
Sure, yeah.
Nobody knew. We didn't have social media, so we had no idea what it was. And in the 90s, like in 91, I remember really kind of first starting to see the big, at that time, what we considered big flocks in October. They would show up in October every year, similar to what they do now. But at that point, 10 to 15,000 birds through October was a lot of white fronts. And now we will have, on a good year, somewhere around 150,000 white fronts in October. And to put that in perspective, they adapt really well, and they adapt to changing conditions. Southwest Louisiana was ground zero for white front hunting for years and years and years.
That's kind of where the culture for it came out.
That's right. Yep. And they came. The birds kind of followed rice production out of Texas through Louisiana and up into Arkansas. And that's kind of how their shift has happened to where it is today. But Southwest Louisiana used to winter that number of birds, and they don't. And that's how we got involved with the study we're involved in now. The biologist, the focus of his study was to see why the birds weren't coming to Louisiana anymore. What it was that changed on the landscape, habitat-wise, pressure-wise, that caused them to no longer frequent that part of the state.
Are you dealing with Osborne?
No, Paul Link on
Okay.
that one. Yep. So we were sitting here one day with Paul. We'd caught some birds and released them, and he was kind of staring off into space. And I was like, "Man, what are you thinking, Paul? What's going on right now?" And he's like, "You know what I'm looking at?" I'm like, "No, I don't know. What?" And he's like, "I'm physically looking at on your farm more white fronts than the entire state of Louisiana will see at any point in time this year." And that really put it in perspective to me, especially when you think about the culture of speck hunting and what that is in Louisiana. And those birds have now changed and left. And fast forward to this year, the white front numbers in Louisiana were horrifyingly low this year. They were low in Arkansas too. There's some 300,000 to 400,000 white fronts were missing in the midwinter survey for Arkansas and Louisiana. And those birds don't hide from airplanes. They're not like a mallard. You don't miss them in the woods. Like either they're somewhere else or they don't exist. And that's a question for people smarter than me. But they're changing, and they're changing at a really rapid rate. You're now seeing numbers. Ducks Unlimited had an article out this came out last week about top 5 places to go spec hunting.
Yeah, Brent Birch was just talking about this.
Yeah.
He was talking about Indiana.
That's exactly where I was going. Indiana, right? So now we're seeing 10 or 15,000 white fronts in Indiana, which is exactly where we were 30 some odd years ago in Arkansas. So what's that? Where are we going to be in 30 more years? If we keep hunting them to no end and pressuring them like there's no end to what's going on, where's it going to end up? Like I don't know. I guess I'm that passionate about them. Like I have to ask myself, and I like hunting them. Don't get me wrong. Like table fare, there may not be a better table fare species than speckle bellies, but I think as stewards of the land, we really need to ask ourselves: is the length and duration of our season, is it good for these birds? Is it good for this resource? I mean, is there an end to this? Can we wring every drop of blood out of it, or is it time to wake up and be like, hey, maybe we shouldn't be doing this?
I kind of so I've seen a difference. I've seen a difference in just like the last 4 years with them, right? If we're being honest, I kind of suspect in Arkansas that we will wring every last drop out of it. I mean, like I'll bring up the GTRs you were talking about. Like I've talked to biologists who will remain nameless, but the state biologists knew 15 years ago that these GTRs were suffering, that we needed to get that water off of those trees. Back then, it was just an untenable thing in the public. Mm-hmm. And they knew they weren't going to be able to, they couldn't get it to happen, and they still had to force it through, this not putting water on it in the same way. We had to lose thousands of acres of hardwoods to be able to make that happen, right? And so we're 15 years behind on that fight, and nobody wants to have less of something that they've gotten used to having. But what you're basically alluding to is like, we're going to have less of it anyway. Mm-hmm. So, personally for me, I would rather try and manage it in a way that, one, showed some respect for the resource, and not this kind of this weird abusive dominion over these animals where we can just use them up, and then all you have is the lamentations of what used to be, right? I mean, something people wouldn't even think about, and this is slightly off topic, but like, you familiar with like a Carolina parakeet? Mm-hmm. Right? So like, people don't know that there used to be an endemic parrot in the southern United States. Like where we are right now, there would be roost with 1,000 of these brightly colored parrots. Yep. Right? And we're talking like 100 years ago, 150 years ago. And they're all gone now. Like all of them are gone. They don't exist. They're completely extinct, right? Same as like a passenger pigeon. And I would argue that the world is less rich because of that, right? I would argue that the human experience is less rich because of that. Take hunting them out of the equation, right? And we've also noticed that, or we should have learned at this point, that, the interconnectedness of like kind of living things is such on a scale that we can't even understand, that when something becomes diminished or goes away, other things are affected by that we don't realize. Mm-hmm. And I understand there's a dichotomy here with, you're listening to two people who, have their self-interest tied up in, just be frank with it, the killing of some of these birds, right? But it doesn't have to be without end, and it doesn't have to be without consideration. So, like, to stick with the white fronts, I know why I'm so enamored with them, and you kind of just explained some of like your origins with it, but what is it about them in particular as a species that kind of has held your attention for the last 3 decades?
Well, I guess beyond just their ability to adapt, I guess single-handedly the vocalization. Mm-hmm. When you call out a mallard, they they call great, they decoy great, and that's extremely rewarding as a hunter. We all enjoy the challenge of hunting. If it were simply about putting food on the table, we would just raise cows and shoot them. It's a challenge. It's that you want to work for something, which I think kind of goes back to your point just a minute ago about getting in front of some of this stuff. Like, the more you work for something, the better the reward it is. So if we get out in front of this and work hard at preserving this resource, then the reward of harvesting it is even better. If it were easy, if you just walked in the woods and killed your limit of ducks every day, it would be fun. But I think the more you put into it, especially as a landowner, as a steward, the harder you work to preserve it, the more those rewards are. But back to my point about the vocalization, I think the thing that's really special about white fronts is that they will return that call, that you communicate to them when you yodel to one, especially when you get them down in like singles and pairs later in the year. You hear them communicate back to you, and it's that connection between the two that I think just is completely unique to white fronts.
You can talk them all the way in.
Yeah. Yep.
I've actually got a buddy who I was telling you about him earlier. Like, he started an outfit, and a really clever name. So he's like a specklebelly guy. Moved up here from Louisiana to chase him, and his outfit's called Call and Answer.
Yeah.
Because answer is like the Latin phrase for a goose, and so he's referencing that call and response type hunting style. That's kind of what it is for me. One, they're beautiful birds. They're like we've talked about, man. They're top-notch table fare. I think just a well done, just skin on specklebelly breast, just prepared simply, like seared with a little pan sauce, rivals any ribeye steak. But yeah, they're so communicative. It's like what people like about turkey hunting, right? Like, there is an interaction with the species that I think really does kind of facilitate a love for them, sure. Right? And they're beautiful, they're a beautiful bird. I love everything about them. I'll tell you what I really like too, and I was telling you how just so preoccupied with geese I am, and that means like specks primarily, light geese as well, Snows and Rosses, and then more and more Canadas. I've really kind of become fascinated with them, but it's the difference in how they work. So that waffling, right? That flipping sideways and upside down and stuff is a way to drop altitude, because they're so big, they can't just backpedal their way in the same way that a duck will. If they got like a lot of wind to contend with, or they're coming in fast, they've got to kind of flip upside down. And I remember someone had to explain it to me before I could see it, but when they do that, their head always stays right side up. Yeah. And just their body rotates, and it's just such a wild thing to see. I like everything about them. What kind of spec call do you blow?
I actually make my own.
Do you?
Yeah.
Are you just turning them, or are you cutting guts and everything?
Guts and everything.
Really?
Yeah. Brass guts. If you, I'm not going to take a stab at anybody that's making duck calls and using other inserts, but yeah, if you're not making the whole thing, you're not really making a call.
That's fascinating, man. I've been getting shopped up to do that stuff.
That's right. I think we talked about that on Instagram.
Just a little bit. Yeah. I've actually got a, you know who James Myers is?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to just nerd out here on these spec calls, but as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, people figured out these PSO T20s, right? Which is originally that gut system was used for several different calls. It was used for like a PSO deer bleat. It was used for, what is it? I think it's like the L20, which is like the goose, which is like a Canada call. And then also for a coyote fox call, like a predator call, right? And then people figured out you could just make some very slight modifications to that wedge and reed setup, and you could blow it differently, and you could start to emulate these yodels and clucks and some of these buzzes that a specklebelly makes, right? Because I think a specklebelly makes more separate vocalizations than almost any other species of waterfowl.
Yeah.
And so then people started taking those guts and they started like turning barrels and tone board sleeves and like putting them together. And so like if you did that and you just changed the material, right? So like something very traditional would be like Bodark, or people call it hedge or Osage orange. That's a harder material than that original molded plastic, and so it's going to give you a different resonance feature. And you can also mess with, you're dealing with your diameters, the amount of air, blah blah blah.
Right.
You can tell I've spent a lot of time like getting nerdy on calls. And then people started figuring out that, so we're dealing with that gut system. I promise I won't go on for this too long, but that gut system is like a 1/2 inch, right? Then people started bumping up to like 5/8, right? The bigger that gets, the little bit easier it is to blow, right? You start getting these deeper sounds. And now people are even messing with like 3/4 inch gut systems. And then like I said, the material will influence this, right? So like the harder the material, kind of the louder it'll get. That's why like lots of duck calls now are made out of acrylic. But then, so like you're talking about, you're turning these tone boards out of brass, which obviously is very dense and very hard, right? So you're going to get a different form of resonance, and you don't have to go into all your particulars of like your gut diameter and stuff, but let me just ask you this. Are you using like screw together tinions, or are you doing like friction fit or
O-ring fit?
O-rings?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, man, before I get out of here, I need to take a look at one of those.
Yeah.
Cause I'm without revealing too many of my future plans, man, like I intend to be doing some of this stuff. And yeah, I've kind of made it a quest of mine over the last year to just like talk to lots of people that know more than I do about it, especially because call making is so secretive, especially if people that make a living on it.
Sure.
Yeah. And so I've kind of like manipulated that a little bit by like writing stories about people and just like standing there and watching them.
Yeah.
And I'm not like stealing their secrets, but there's remarkably little information on the internet. Like I bet you one of the only things you couldn't find an instructional on the internet is how to cut down Alt D2.
Right.
Like it doesn't exist.
I think the neat thing about our culture though is a lot of people, face to face are a lot more willing to share information.
Oh, absolutely. They take your measure too, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's a really cool thing. Like the collection that's sitting here around the corner from us, like duck calls, particularly made in this area, are like a really cool folk art for me. Like I grew up around R&Ts and Taylors, and it's really cool. And it's a really cool form of artistry, and it really ties into that culture that we talk about. There's so much more to duck hunting than just the ducks that you kill. It's a lifestyle. It's a culture. So anyway, that's kind of where we got started on it. Somebody asked, why we weren't making duck calls, or why I wasn't making duck calls, and the answer is pretty simple. Like, there's a million great duck calls out there. Like, we weren't going to reinvent the wheel. But at the time, R&T was still making their narrow reed calls. So and which is a really, if you've never blown one, you should try to find one. I don't know if they still make them or not, but really neat call, and kind of serves a neat role now because everyone's gone to these short reed, wider gut systems.
You're talking about for spec calls?
Yes, spec calls. Sorry.
Yeah. So just so folks understand, the wider the diameter of like that gut system, the deeper sound it's going to make, which it also consequently is kind of easier to blow.
Right.
And maybe I'm wrong in this, but I was taught that the older a specklebelly gets, kind of the higher pitch its call will often get. Have you ever heard that?
I've never heard that. That could very well be, but I've never heard that.
But either way, man, what you'd end up doing by using a more narrow gut system is you're giving them something different to hear, right?
Yeah, just something different than what they're hearing everywhere else. Currently. And to me, they're a little tougher to blow. Like once you really get a hold of it.
Oh no, they are. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very unique. But anyway, at the time, that's what R&T was putting out, and they were great. But we just kind of experimented and started fooling around with it. Got a lathe and enjoyed turning them, and got a little design going. I got a machine shop that cut them for us, and they were sounded really, really good. Now there's a lot of people that are making great speckle blade calls now, and, and there were then. Early on in the 90s, I think it was maybe Backwoods Products out of El Dorado was one of the first like kind of commercially available speckle blade call, at least in this part of the world. So, I mean, that's kind of where it's come. Speckle blade hunting has come, at least for us. Now, you've got the modified stuff and some other earlier cultural things, but we've gone from one commercially available call to now we're making them and you know, they're everywhere, and there's some really good ones being made. But that whole sport of chasing them has really evolved in the last 30 to 40 years.
Yeah. And kind of like, so the two big, I guess right now, like the two big populations of speckle-bellied geese are going to be like in this area in kind of eastern Arkansas and then northern California, right? Have you hunted them in California before?
No, I have not.
I want to try and do that over there. There's just like some questions that I'd like to just go and experience and kind of get some answers to it. You know, like their limits astronomical compared to here. It's like 10 a day compared to 2 where we're at right now. And I don't know if that's just, I don't know if that's because there's fewer people pursuing them, if it's like more of a niche thing over there, or if they've just got that many more or what. Have you ever been over there in like the Central Valley in California?
No, I've not.
It's a wild thing to see as far as waterfowl.
I'm sure.
It's like I was driving from the airport to this place that I was this thing for this black heritage hunt. It was like I was kind of teaching and hunting there, and just going across this highway coming out of where was that? Sacramento. You're like driving across this marsh on this highway, and there were so many birds. Like I called my buddy, like I felt emotional, man. I bet you there was 50,000 ducks just mobbed up, and like stuff you don't see in those sorts of numbers here. I mean, just thousands and thousands of pintails, more pintails than I'd ever seen.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, they get them out there.
Swans, mobs of swans and crazy stuff. It was really neat. Well, so we've like kind of nerded out just on like the bones of waterfowling and the science of a lot of this, but we spent some time before we started talking about maybe some, you know, and maybe this is us patting ourselves in the back too much, but like just some of our perceived differences in how we're approaching waterfowling compared to, you know, a lot of the rest of the culture, right? So I'm gonna tee you up on this, and then kind of allow you to dig as much of a grave for yourself as you want with it, right? But so I've been somewhat public about this, but I'm not a fan of a lot of the public waterfowl culture. I think it's unnecessarily I don't know what to say, unnecessarily violent, because like you're engaging in something that, as I've said before, is like snuffing out sentience. But there's I don't know, there's just kind of an ickiness, or like maybe a little bit, I think I said that in the last podcast, there's almost like a lack of class involved in it, right? And some of this is like the language that we use, or that is used a lot. So people talk about like smashing up birds or banging up birds or really hammering them, or stacking them up. And, you know, that goes along with like pile pictures, which is, I'm not completely against pile pictures, and I've been involved in some, but it's, I do think there is a way that waterfowling is presented in like a digital age and on social media that is not demonstrable of some of this stuff we're talking about in this conversation, right? We're talking about being stewards of the environment, conservationist, like really having a love for these birds, and then all of the intangible things that go along with it. You know, especially with, you know, this is waterfowling is access to a specifically American form of folk art, as far as like decoy carving, as far as making calls. We've talked about that a little bit. There's also I mean, I don't think you can get past the fact that, even though like I'm a father to daughters, and that's how I'm going to pass on hunting to, the next generation of my family. This is something that is largely and historically has been passed from like father to son, right? So then you have all these kind of deep resonant stories that go along with that. And I don't want that stuff. I don't want all the beauty and the romance and everything else that goes along with this, as well as like for me personally, the emphasis on having some really beautiful and memorable meals, and those being a way to get access to, what I talk about a lot, which is like the stories, because like no one would really hunt without being able to tell the stories, right? Mm-hmm. And then having these mementos that are really like a way to access the stories, right? Like there's a lot of beautiful mounts in here, and we talked about it a little bit before we started recording, right? But you're telling stories along with that. It's not this isn't some sort of like strange phallic representation. This is you saying like I got that bird, 30 years ago, or my grandpa got that bird, or whatever these references are. So these are like points of contact. So I asked Brent Birch this. Well, I'm going to ask you this one question that I asked Brent, and then I'm going to ask you another one. But and I'd just be interested if there's a difference in the answer. If you personally, if you could like, if there's a magic wand being waved and you could guarantee that waterfowling in Arkansas could continue for another 100 years, say, right? With lots of birds and people having access to good hunts, and like these successive generations, being able to go out and hunt. But to make that happen, you personally, you could never kill another duck or another goose. Would you make that deal?
Yes.
Yeah, Brent wouldn't, man. Brent said, no, man, I'm trying to hunt, which I respect the answer too, because it's a super honest one. Yeah, I think I would make that deal. I think I would make that deal too. Now, I would still want to go and I'd still want to go and like look at birds a lot.
Right.
And hopefully I'd be able to like still call.
Yeah.
But yeah, so to me, that speaks to kind of like the intimacy of the relationship with these different species. So,
I'll elaborate on that real
please.
quick because we mentioned him earlier when we were talking. Lee Chose told me one time, he was like, man, he's like, I don't have to kill him anymore. He's like, I just have to see him. And I'll never forget him saying that. And I get it, because my father was the same way when I was a kid. Like, he didn't need to pull the trigger. He's like, man, I've killed plenty. He's like, watching you hunt. He's like, that's good enough for me. And I see it now with my kids. That's why it's easy to say, yeah, I'd give it up. If it meant ensuring that it wasn't going to change and it was going to be as good or better than it is now for the next 100 years, yeah, I'd give it up. Yeah. Because I don't need to kill him. I just need to see him. I think that's one of the reasons the study came out last year, the Audubon Society. You look at all the bird populations in the U.S. that are declining. The only thing that's actually steady or increasing is waterfowl. And why is that? When we hunt them, you think it'd be less, right? But that's the thing I try to teach my kids. Like, the reason these species are doing well is because the people that are hunting them are passionate about preserving them too. So yeah, to answer your question, yeah, I'd give it up.
Yeah. And look, I understand, man, that is a strange juxtaposition, right? But that's also like the basis of the North American conservation model. Like, the reason that we still have, charismatic megafauna, the reason there's still bears and elk, right? And pronghorn and white-tailed deer and mule deer and the like, is because people wanted to preserve those species, not just out of love for the species, out of self-interest. Like, these were people that wanted to hunt. But, you got to think about this. Like, we think of elk and black bear as like mountain animals, right?
Right.
Elk were largely plains animals, right? Black bears were largely animals that, lived in swamps and ranged across a variety of habitat. The most widely disseminated mammal in North America, pre-European contact, was a mountain lion. It was everywhere, right? Mm-hmm. these remnant populations that survived were the ones that people couldn't get to get all of them, right? And that's why you have like these species up in the mountains, right? So, yeah, I mean, I just want to admit that I understand, like, because there's people that listen to this podcast that don't hunt. That is a strange dichotomy, and even sometimes I even feel kind of weird about it. You know, like I remember trying to explain to my dad that like I can't explain it. It's weird to spend so much time and so much effort pursuing something, and then ultimately the way to possess it is to end its life. But like to me too, with like the food, man, that's a huge way to participate in these very natural cycles, because I do think that hunting is a supernatural human thing to do. But you know, like what I try and preach, like whole bird usage and, doing more with them than just making poppers, even though poppers are good, you know, to me, that's kind of a way to, one, simultaneously like place a lot of value on that animal and you know, kind of show some respect to it, and appreciate the fact that, you know, this thing used to be alive and now it's not. And then, you know, you can get real deep into, you know, the fact that you're transferring its energy and all that other stuff. But, man, I would ask you this question too. What is, because, yeah, we probably don't need to go all into like, this is what I don't like about popular duck hunting. But what sort of substantive change would you make to waterfowling culture that you think would pay the most dividends if you could?
Change present or past?
I mean, right now we're dealing with what we can do now.
Yeah. I don't know. That's tough. I don't know that at present there's one thing that you could do. I mean, I know we talk about our culture of hunting and passing it on. I mentioned that a little bit briefly in a post today on Instagram. You know, for eons, we have been teaching the next generation to hunt. You know, Jimbo says, you know, he hunts because he has to. Like, look at our teeth. You know, we're omnivores, like we're meat eaters. You know, so from caveman era, we've hunted animals and we've taught our offspring to do that, and that's why that culture continues today. So I don't know what I would do today. Now, if I could back up 23 years, I would tell you what I would do. When we talk about it being the class of 99, we talk about the spinning wing decoy. For those that don't know, it's a motorized decoy that wing flash looks as realistic as anything ever did. And they came out in the late 90s. Right about the same time, we went to adaptive harvest management. We went to liberal seasons of 6 ducks in 60 days. And kind of right there in that same circle, you got social media. So you had 3 things there that happened within a span of 3 or 4 or 5 years. And it fundamentally changed our sport. And it was no one thing. Like, I'm not going to say, oh, take away the spinners and things are going to be fine. No, I mean, they're here. They've been here. And there were a lot of people that when they came out, you know, hunted over them the first time and realized, like, this is wrong. We shouldn't be this skilled at fooling birds. And I mean, I remember the first day we hunted over them, like birds are lining up like planes at an airport to land, running in the back of the thing, knocking it down. You know, it was too effective. But when you combine those 3 things, you had a tool that you could put in the hand of an unskilled hunter that suddenly made him skilled. He didn't have to be able to blow a duck call. He didn't have to know how to scout or where to go. He could simply walk out there, stick that in the ground, he could kill ducks. And then you've got these liberal seasons now, so you've got 60 days to go hunt. You can kill 6 birds. The opportunity is greater. The thrill is better because you can kill more. So you've got an unskilled hunter. You've got more opportunity, and now you've got social media. So now we're bragging about ducks, which is, look, we have pictures here, 50 years, 60, 70-year-old pictures here celebrating the hunt. There's nothing wrong with taking a photograph that celebrates the hunt. That's how we hold on to those memories. That's why we mount birds. That's why we do all these things. But some of that distastefulness that we talk about, I think stems from the collaboration of those 3 things. we call it the class of 99 because you introduced an entire class of duck hunters to duck hunting, but they didn't get taught by their dad or their uncle or the guy down the street who took them under their wing and took them duck hunting. They just walked out one day and they became a duck hunter because they had the tool to make them successful and a platform to brag to everyone else about. And it changed duck hunting. We've got a whole generation of duck hunters now who don't know anything besides 6 ducks in 60 days and spinning wing decoys. They didn't grow up, in Converse waders, the rubber Converse. They didn't grow up with that. They didn't grow up with their grandfather taking them. And that's not their fault. And it doesn't make them bad for our sport. It doesn't make them a villain in any way. It just means that we've got to do a better job going forward of teaching people the culture of our sport, and that hunting, the experience of hunting, the real reward of duck hunting is not necessarily if I can put my full limit on my stringer when I come out. It's that I enjoy that hunt, that I find value in that hunt, and that value is not always what I'm able to put on the table. Like I mentioned before, one of my favorite hunts from a couple years ago, my oldest son, he was 5 years old, killed his first duck. That was the only duck we killed that afternoon. And I wouldn't trade that hunt for anything. The value of that one bird and his face when he pulled that trigger is, it's tremendous. And it's hanging on the wall in his room. Like, it's a true trophy for us. And it wasn't about everybody that was there killing their 6. We just killed the 1. So I guess if I could change anything currently, it would be to improve our culture. And to go back 20 years, I can see where I think, and some of my friends and other people in the industry think, that culture found a way to erode a little bit. And it's no fault of any one thing or one person, but it was just kind of a perfect storm of situations there that allowed it to start. And I think that's where we have these log picks, these pile picks, these buzzwords that irritate you and I. Like, one of the ones that kills me is grind. Like, people talk about that, like, oh man, it's a grind today. We're grinding on him. Like, and I don't really know what it means. Like, is it a grind? Like, it's a pain in your rear end? Because, like, if it's not fun, you shouldn't be doing it. And then on the flip side, like, if you're grinding on them, was it like a meat grinder? Like, is that a really tasteful way to describe our sport? Like, that's just one of those words that really gets me.
Yeah, I know. I think that's so. There's. And we probably don't even have time to get into all this, but there's a strange attempt to make waterfowling like this hyper masculine activity, right? And so I'd even say in some kind of outdated ideas about masculinity, to where you just like grind and you wear yourself down, right? And what I have found is that I've got to, look, especially this past year, I was gone from home more than I've ever been, right? Like, professionally, I'm starting to like travel, and just these things are happening, right? But just the idea of like grinding, right? Like, if you look that word up, I heard someone else talking about this, like, grinding means to wear something down, right? There's less of it, right? Mm-hmm. But that can be damaging, right? Like, that's something I noticed this year really bad, that I've like, right now I'm actively taking steps about trying to counteract, because I kind of lived so rough this season of just getting so worn down, man. I like got fat. I put a bunch of weight on, right? I was just like eating crummy food. I was exhausted in a way that I don't think let me be like the best husband and father that I was capable of being. Mm-hmm. And like, so for this next season, I'm going into it thinking about that stuff and saying, I've got to have breaks here. I've got to just go back home, right, and not worry about these birds, and take care of the stuff that, have the quiet moments that actually makes you a family, right? Mm-hmm. It's one of the reasons I didn't go after snows at all. And there's lots of other reasons I didn't go after snows this year. But part of that was, man, by the time I got to the end of January, like, I need to be at home.
Right.
And Yeah, I mean, just probably like anything else, man. Like all things in balance is a good thing, right?
Sure.
And when stuff starts getting out of balance, it's worth paying attention to that and then trying to make some adjustments. And yeah, I mean, I would say that there maybe is right now publicly there is an imbalance in how waterfowling is portrayed. You know, and to me, one of the ways to balance that out is like who's involved in it. You know, like I don't want to go to a duck camp that has a rule that like no women are allowed, right? Because like I've got a kid who's about to be 5 years old, and like I want my daughter to be able to hunt with me. You know what I mean? I don't want to go to a duck camp where, you know, it's like just a good old boys club and like I personally feel uncomfortable there, like just crazy stuff's going to get said, right? Like I'm not saying obviously that's not everywhere, but like if we're talking real talk, there's enough of that especially as we're dealing with hunting, we're dealing with something that is diminishing as far as the number of people that participated in this country, right? If we want this stuff to continue, I think we need balance in it, and that means we need ethical and moral balance in it. We need a conservation-minded balance in it, and we need to broaden who's involved in the activities so that successive generations can continue to experience this stuff. Because I mean, I'll tell you this right now, man. Like, and I think I can very honestly say this is like hunting in general and specifically waterfowling has changed the course and tenor and quality of my life, right? It's not something that I grew up doing. I came to it kind of accidentally, and I've like devoted my entire life to it right now, right?
Yeah.
Like a large part of my identity is tied up in it, right? And I think for the better of me, I think it's better for my family. And now that I have a family that like me and my wife are building and creating, right? Mm-hmm. It's influencing that. Like my kids' relationship with the natural world and where their food comes from is categorically different than mine was growing up, right? And I think that will continue to pay dividends, hopefully, you know, for as long as there's Wilkins, right? Mm-hmm. Or my strain of Wilkins anyway. So anyway, yeah, man, it's hard to do these like waterfowl-centric podcasts without getting on a little bit of a soapbox. Sure. But I mean, if you didn't want to hear me on a soapbox, you probably wouldn't listen to this podcast at all. So, well, hey, Cason, man, I so appreciate you letting me come by here and take a look at this place and the conversation. Like we had a really long conversation on the phone maybe like a year ago. Yeah. And I was so impressed, man. I told my wife, I was like, man, that might be one of the like the most intelligent sounding duck hunters I've ever talked to. So I'm glad you exist and that you have this profile and continuing this legacy. And yeah, man, maybe next couple seasons we'll get to do a hunt or something together, man.
Yeah, for sure, man. Thanks for giving me a chance to talk to your audience. It's it's about passing it on. So I think anytime that you can, like you've done here, you develop an audience that you can talk to, and we can, spread duck hunting in a positive way, waterfowl hunting in general. It doesn't have to be ducks. I mean, we need hunters in our country. We need people that are conservation minded from that aspect. And anytime that like-minded folks can get together and talk stories and discuss it and maybe bring someone else to our sport, that's a good thing.
Absolutely. All right, folks. Well, thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.
Folks, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Black Duck Revival podcast. As always, it's produced by me, Jonathan Wilkins, and Brian Sachs. Also, another reminder that if you're interested in coming down for a catfish excursion, when I take you and a friend or a partner out for a couple of days in the backwaters and bayous of East Arkansas to run limb lines and trot lines for catfish, just go to the website. That's blackduckrevival.com. Go to the experiences tab, and that'll take you to all the pertinent information. You can also get a hold of me there, and we can figure out a time for you to come and go catfishing. We'll have waterfowl dates out soon, and also as I'm usually kind of petitioning the audience, if you like this podcast, please tell a friend, tell an enemy, tell an acquaintance. The more people that we can get listening to the podcast, the more opportunities it opens up. I will start traveling here in just a few short weeks, and we will kind of move away from some of these Arkansas interviews, and we'll be getting some really cool and interesting people on the West Coast and in the Western United States, over there in Montana, as well as I wind up there for BHA Rendezvous. So we will be diversifying who we're talking to, and like I said, the more folks that we can get listening to that, the easier it makes it for me to continue doing this. So I so appreciate you guys listening. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time.